Stimulus checks for $1,200 are being mailed out to many Americans. Some already got them through direct deposit, but they're being mailed to help Americans through this crisis. For the first time ever, President Trump's name is going to appear on an IRS check. It's being put in the memo line because the president isn't authorized to sign the checks. Did the president personally suggest this idea?
Well, let me just correct you and say the checks have not gone out yet, and the reason why the checks have not gone out is we're hoping that more people, as I said, will go to irs.gov. It's much safer to send out direct deposits. As it relates to the president's name on it, the president could have been authorized to sign the checks. That would have slowed things down. We didn't want to do that. We did put the president's name on the check. That was my idea. He is the president, and I think it's a terrific symbol to the American public.
Okay, first of all, if you think that it wasn't Donald Trump's idea to plaster his name on these stimulus checks, then I've got a bridge to sell you. Now, what's happened here is that the Treasury Department has ordered Trump's name printed on stimulus checks that the IRS is rushing to send to tens of millions of Americans, a process that senior IRS officials have conceded could slow the check's delivery by several days. And so Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is jumping on the grenade for Trump and claiming that it was his decision to put Trump's name on outgoing federal stimulus checks. In other words, he's trying to shield Trump from criticism over a decision that will hurt American families for the sole purpose of coddling Trump's ego. And by the way, these checks aren't even going to be signed by Trump because legally they can't be, since his name actually has no business being on that check. So instead, his name is going to appear in the memo line, the same place where your grandma writes happy birthday. The only difference being that that message from your grandma actually makes sense. But the purpose of this move is obvious. It's to try and take credit for sending these checks, as if he's sending it to us as a personal favor. But this isn't his money. Donald Trump is not paying us. This is our money. Americans paid into the system with our tax dollars. Tax dollars, by the way, that seem to have been wasted considering it's the federal government's job to coordinate a response to this crisis, and so far we've got the most cases and the most deaths on the face of the earth. So I get that Trump wants to make it look like he's doing us a favor, but taking credit for giving us our own tax dollars and then failing to effectively use the money that is being spent isn't exactly cause for celebration. Although, I should note that if Trump really wants to personally help the American people, for starters, he'd stop taking million-dollar golf trips on a weekly basis that the American people are left picking up the tab for. Keep in mind, too, that Trump isn't the only one at fault here. Steve Mnuchin might think he's being a good little foot soldier, but all he's doing is putting himself out there for a guy who will just use him until he's finished with him. And we see this on a constant basis. Trump will chew his officials up and spit them out. Just ask Mick Mulvaney, who's now the special envoy for Northern Ireland after committing a series of gaffes. Just ask Rex Tillerson, who was fired over Twitter. Just ask John Bolton, who was fired over Twitter. When he is done with you, when he gets what he needs out of you, he tosses you aside. And the only thing sadder than that is the fact that his mouthpieces all fail to realize that they're going to be next. That it couldn't possibly be them until they are sitting in their living rooms watching Trump trash them on national TV. And so they continue to blindly do his bidding and discard every shred of dignity they might have once had, like by showing up on national television and taking credit for putting his name absurdly in the memo line of a stimulus check. And eventually he'll lose the need for Mnuchin too, and it'll only make this stunt seem all the more pathetic. But the worst part of all of this is that yet again, he's exploiting a crisis for personal political gain, just like he has from day one. The simple fact of the matter is that this has always been political for Trump. The guy wouldn't let a cruise ship dock because he didn't want his number of cases to go up and reflect poorly on him, and he admitted it.
I would rather, because I like the numbers being where they are. I don't need to have the numbers double because of one ship. That wasn't our fault.
On February 25th, the director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases publicly warned of the virus and said, quote, "We need to be preparing for significant disruption in our lives." Trump responded by calling the Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar fuming because her factual announcement spooked the markets, which has always been his sole priority. And in the last month, we've watched as Trump has used his time at press briefings not to reassure a frightened nation, but to attack Obama, to attack Biden, to attack Democratic governors, to call for uprisings in blue states, to blame the FDA, China, the Mexican border. This entire process has been one big finger-pointing session by the guy who's supposed to be in charge, and yet physically cannot bring himself to assume even 1 ounce of responsibility here. The most important thing for Donald Trump isn't taking steps to save American lives, it's advancing his re-election campaign. That's why he's more concerned with stalling payments that millions of Americans rely on to buy food, to pay their rent, to keep the lights on, payments that weren't even enough to begin begin with so that he can pat himself on the back by sticking his name in the memo line. Because per usual, all he cares about is making sure that he can steal the credit.